She had no choice. With trembling hands, Billionaire prepared herself. The perfume rich, musky, and seductive burned her nostrils as she spritzed it onto her skin. She slipped into a tight, revealing dress, her fingers shaking as she laced it up. Tonight, she would sell herself, body and soul, to a man who had promised to save her mother. But the price, her dignity, her future, she was ready, and yet she was not. It was the price for her mother's life. It all began days ago, when her mother, Mama Iniola, the village's most respected healer, fell ill. The sickness wasn't from the earth, nor could it be treated with herbs, charms, or any prayer known to the elders. It was as though something had descended from the spirit world to claim her. Mama Iniola, who had saved countless lives, was now powerless against the illness. The village healers were helpless. The whispers in the village began a curse. Was it the wrath of the gods? Billionaire watched her mother grow weaker by the day. Mama Iniola was the center of the village, her wisdom, her strength, her love. But now, the woman who had once healed others could do nothing but lie in her bed, gasping for breath. The village had no answers. No help came. They all knew that without a cure, her mother would not survive the week. In her desperation, Billionaire sought a solution from Musa, a wealthy trader who had come to the village with tales of his riches. He was not like the others. He had power. He was known for taking what he wanted, regardless of the cost, and he had a reputation that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers. Yet, in her desperation, Billionaire approached him. "Musa, please," she begged one evening, as he lounged in the village square. "You must help me. My mother is dying. She has the strength to heal everyone else, but she cannot heal herself. The elders have given up, and I do not know where else to turn." Musa's gaze was cold, calculating. He looked her up and down, taking his time. "I can save her," he said, his voice like velvet, "but I will require something in return." Billionaire's heart sank. She had heard the rumors, what Musa demanded of women in return for his aid, but her mother's life was slipping away. There was no time to be afraid. "What is it that you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Musa smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. One night with you and I will ensure that your mother is healed. I will send my doctors. I will cover all costs. But you must give me this one night. When the sun rises, your mother will be well." Billionaire's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, one night?" "I mean exactly what I say," Musa replied, his voice low, almost threatening. "A night in my bed, and your mother will live. You will belong to me for that night, and I will make sure your mother is free from the sickness that has claimed her." Billionaire froze. The words felt like a slap to her face. Her pride, her innocence, her everything was being bartered for a chance to save her mother. She could not breathe. The shock and anger surged through her, but one thought echoed louder than the rest. "I have no choice." The following evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Billionaire made her way to Musa's mansion. Her legs felt heavy, as though the earth itself was trying to hold her back. Each step was filled with the weight of her decision. She tried to steady her breath, but the taste of fear lingered in her mouth. She had heard the stories of what happened to women who entered Musa's world. They came out, changed, broken, lost, a shadow of who they once were, and yet she walked toward the mansion. She knew she had made the decision already. It had been made the moment Musa offered the price. She stood at the gates of his mansion, her heart pounding. A servant opened the gates and let her in without a word. The grand hall was filled with a soft scent of incense and the glow of golden lamps. Every corner seemed to shimmer with excess. The walls were adorned with rich tapestries, the floors covered with plush rugs. It was a place of wealth and power, a place that made her feel small and insignificant. Yet she was here, willing to do whatever it took to save her mother. When Musa appeared, sitting at the head of the room, his eyes met hers with a cold intensity. His gaze lingered, and for a moment, Billionaire felt like prey being studied by a predator. "Ah, Billionaire," he said, standing slowly. "You've come. Now, let's make this a night to remember, one you will never forget." His smile was sharp, unsettling, as he gestured to the grand bed draped with velvet curtains. Billionaire's knees nearly gave way beneath her. She had already given herself up. There was no turning back now. But the thought of her mother lying ill in the village, her life slowly slipping away, gave her the courage to move forward. She had made the choice. She would save her mother, even if it cost her soul. She would give herself to Musa tonight, and in return, her mother would live. The night stretched before her, long and suffocating. Every inch of the room seemed to close in on Billionaire as she stood there, frozen. The weight of the decision she had made was crushing, pressing down on her chest with an invisible hand. "I have no choice," she told herself, but her mind betrayed her. Her body screamed at her to run, to flee this man, this mansion, this nightmare. Yet the thought of her mother, the pale, feverish face she had left behind in the village, held her fast like a chain wrapped around her soul. Musa's footsteps echoed across the room as he moved toward her, each step deliberate, each movement measured. His gaze was unwavering, and his smile, the one that had seemed so charming when they first spoke, was now a twisted thing. It was as if she were already his, already broken, already lost. Billionaire felt her heart race as he reached out and touched her arm, his fingers cold against her skin. "Come, sit," Musa said softly, his voice like velvet, but with an edge that made her shiver. "You've made the right choice, Billionaire. Your mother will be saved, and I will have what I desire." His words were smooth, calculated. He didn't even try to hide the darkness in his eyes. Billionaire took a step back, trying to steady herself. She was a woman with no options left, a woman who had agreed to a deal she couldn't take back. But in her heart, she could still feel the echoes of who she was before a daughter. A healer, in her own right. A protector. But all of that felt far away now. What kind of woman would she be after tonight? Musa saw her hesitation. He didn't care. He only wanted her submission, and he would take it, no matter what. "You're nervous," he said, almost laughing, but there was no humor in his voice. "But you shouldn't be. I've promised you what you wanted. Your mother's life is in my hands, and I have given you what you need." Billionaire's chest tightened at the words, her mother's life. How much had she truly sacrificed for that life? Was her mother worth it? Would her mother still love her after this? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers, only the cold reality of her choice. Musa gestured to the Beta massive, ornate thing draped in dark velvet. The soft glow of the room seemed to pulse with the weight of their unspoken bargain. Billionaire took a hesitant step forward, and then another. Her legs were weak beneath her, but she had made her choice. She had to finish what she had started, for Mama Eniola, for the village, for the life of the woman who had given her everything. Billionaire sat on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She could hear the sound of her breath, shallow and erratic. She could feel the sweat on her palms, the coldness in the air. But there was no turning back now. Musa came closer, his presence overwhelming. He stood above her, his face shadowed by the dim light. He reached out, lifting her chin with one finger. His touch was possessive, and she had no choice but to meet his gaze. His eyes, dark and unfeeling, pierced through her. He was a man who saw only what he could take, and right now, she was his. "I want you to understand something, Billionaire," he said, his voice a soft murmur. "You belong to me tonight. No one else. I will keep my word, and your mother will be healed. But don't forget the price. Don't forget who saved her." Billionaire's throat tightened, but she nodded, her eyes cast down. She didn't want to look at him. She didn't want to acknowledge the bargain they had struck, the degradation she was about to endure. But the thought of her mother who had raised her, who had given her life, who had shown her what strength was kept her rooted to the spot. As Musa's hands began to move toward her, Billionaire fought to keep her mind focused. She forced herself to think of the village, of the people who relied on Mama Eniola's healing, of the life she had lived. But it felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating her. The world outside this room, the world of warmth and light, felt so far away. She was caught in this moment. Tease, terrible, irreversible moment. "You think I am a monster, don't you?" Musa asked, his tone almost playful. "But I am giving you what you wanted. I am giving you life." Billionaire's hands shook as she turned her face away. She couldn't speak. She couldn't defend herself against the terrible bargain she had made. But she had made it, and now there was nothing left but to endure it. As the night wore on, every minute felt like an eternity. She became a vessel for Moose's desires, her body no longer her own, her soul slipping further and further away with each touch, each whisper. She closed her eyes, clinging to the thought of her mother, the woman who had given so much for the village, the woman who had given so much for her. Billionaire had sold herself for her mother's life. But as the night wore on, the question burned in her mind. Had she made the right choice? When the sun broke over the horizon, it was as if Billionaire had awakened from a long, terrible dream. Her body felt foreign, as though it no longer belonged to her, and her mind was heavy, clouded by the weight of what had just happened. She lay still in the dark, damp sheets, her limbs tangled in the silken fabric that felt too soft, too cruel against her skin. The warmth of the night had faded, leaving behind a cold emptiness that gnawed at her chest. She didn't want to open her eyes. She didn't want to see the man who had taken so much from her, the man who had promised her mother's life in exchange for her soul. But the reality of the situation pressed against her like a vice. Her mother's life, Mama Iniolo, was the price she had paid. The thought of her mother, still alive, still breathing, was the only thing that gave her strength to push herself out of the bed. The memory of her mother's fading body, the trembling hands, the desperate whispers, those thoughts anchored her in the present. But it wasn't enough. Musa had kept his word. The deal was done. Her mother's life had been spared, but at the expense of her dignity. What kind of woman had she become? She stood up, her legs weak, her body sore in places she hadn't known it could hurt. Every movement felt like a betrayal to her own spirit. The room felt too large, too empty, as though it were mocking her. The bed where she had lain now felt like a prison, and Musa's presence, though absent, lingered in the air like a stench that refused to leave. She could hear his voice in her mind. Like an echo, "I will save your mother. You will belong to me tonight." The thought made her sick. Billionaire dressed quickly, trying not to think about the bed she had just risen from, about the price she had paid. She wouldn't stay here any longer. She had made the choice for her mother. Now it was time to return to the village, to face what awaited her, to find out if the promise had been fulfilled. But as she walked toward the door, she hesitated. The room felt silent. Too silent. There was no sound from the halls, no servants bustling about as there had been the night before. Her heart pounded as she reached for the door handle. Her fingers shook. She didn't want to face him again, not after what had happened. She had given him everything, and now she feared there would be nothing left of herself. With a deep breath, she turned the handle. As the door opened, the bright sunlight flooded the room. She blinked against it, shielding her eyes from the harsh light. The mansion outside was as magnificent as it had been the night before. Too grand, too much, too far removed from the life she knew. She stepped out into the hall, but there was no one around. The air seemed heavy, as though the very walls of the mansion were holding their breath, waiting for something. The servant who had let her in last night appeared at the end of the hallway, his face as expressionless as ever. "Your mother," he said, his voice a neutral monotone, "is waiting for you." He did not offer a smile, a word of sympathy. Nothing. Bolin's breath caught in her throat. The words were simple, but they hit her like a hammer. Her mother was alive. The impossible had happened. Musa had kept his word. She had made the sacrifice, and now her mother's life was spared. But Billionaire couldn't feel relief. She couldn't feel joy. She only felt a deep emptiness, like a hole had been carved into her chest. Her mother was alive, yes, but what about her? What about the woman who had given up everything to save her? Her legs moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the gates of the mansion, toward the road that led back to the village. The servant did not follow. Musa did not call for her. The bargain had been struck. The night was over. There was nothing left between them but silence. When Billionaire finally reached the village, the sun was high in the sky, burning away the last traces of night's shadow. The familiar sights of her home, the muddy paths, the humble huts, all greeted her, but it felt as though she were seeing them for the first time. It was as though she had stepped out of one world and into another, a world that no longer belonged to her. She went straight to her mother's hut, the one place that still felt like home, the one place where she might find peace. But when she entered, her heart sank. Mama Eniola was sitting up, her face flushed with the health Billionaire had never seen before, her eyes clearer, her breathing steadier. She was alive. But her mother did not greet her with the usual warmth. Instead, she looked at her daughter with something darker in her gaze, something Billionaire could not place. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped turning. "Billionaire, Mama," Eniola whispered, her voice still weak but clear. "I know what you have done." Billionaire froze, her heart lurching in her chest. "Mama, you went to him," her mother said, her voice steady, but the weight of her words cut like a knife. "You made a deal with him." Billionaire opened her mouth to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but no words came. Her mother's eyes, those eyes that had once shown only love, and care now looked at her as if she were a stranger. "You gave yourself to him, Mama," Eniola continued. "You gave him everything. What have you become, my daughter? What price have you paid?" Billionaire's knees buckled beneath her. She had made the decision for love, for life, for a chance to save her mother. But in the process, she had lost something she couldn't name. Something inside her was broken. Her mother reached out, her hand trembling, and took Billionaire's in her own. "It is not too late to find yourself again," Mama Eniola whispered. "But you must understand the cost. Not everything is worth saving, and not every sacrifice is a blessing." Billionaire looked into her mother's eyes, and in that moment, she understood. She had done what was needed, yes, but at what cost? What would she do now, with the emptiness that lay inside her? Could she ever reclaim what had been lost? Days passed, but they felt like years. Billionaire moved through her life, with the heavy burden of her choice weighing on her heart. Her mother's recovery was miraculous. Mama Eniola had returned to her full strength, her presence once again the lifeblood of the village. People came to her for guidance, for healing, for wisdom. The village had celebrated her return, their prayers of thanks filling the air, but Billionaire felt nothing but the suffocating silence in her own heart. She couldn't escape it. The night she had spent with Musa haunted her like a shadow that followed her every step. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his cold smile, the way he had touched her, marked her, claimed her as if she were nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. And yet, he had kept his promise. Her mother lived. The village rejoiced. But Billionaire couldn't rejoice. Not for what she had lost. The once bright, beautiful woman who had walked through the village with pride, who had cared for her mother and her people, now seemed a shadow of herself. She no longer held her head high. She could no longer look anyone in the eye without feeling the weight of her shame. The village had no idea what she had done to save her mother, but Billionaire knew, and her mother knew. Her mother's silent gaze followed her everywhere. Mama Eniola no longer spoke of what had transpired, but the weight of her unspoken words was heavier than any curse. Billionaire could feel it every time they crossed paths. Her mother's eyes held disappointment, sorrow, and a quiet judgment that tore into her like a blade. And though she longed for forgiveness, she knew it was not something easily given. One evening, after the sun had set and the village had settled into its peaceful hum, Billionaire found herself standing in front of the small hut where her mother now sat, surrounded by villagers who came to seek advice. Mama Eniola was as strong as she had been before, but Billionaire saw the change in her. Her mother's face had become harder, colder, as if the very act of survival had stripped her of some essential part of herself. "Billionaire," Mama Eniola called to her softly, motioning for her to come closer. "Come, sit with me." Billionaire hesitated. It had been days since they had spoken beyond what was necessary, since the moment of revelation. The silence had stretched between them like an unbridgeable chasm, and Billionaire had no idea how to cross it. But her mother's voice, though gentle, held a command that could not be ignored. Slowly, Billionaire moved toward her mother, her feet heavy as if weighed down by invisible chains. She sat beside her mother, and the silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Billionaire could feel her mother Isageson, ere the unspoken words that burned her from within. Finally, it was Mama Eniola who spoke. "You made a sacrifice for me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the weight of the words crushed Billionaire's heart. A sacrifice I never wanted you to make. A sacrifice that no mother should ask of her child. But you made it. Balin's throat tightened. She had no words to explain herself. No words to defend the actions she had taken. What could she say? She had done what she had to, hadn't she? She had done it for her mother, for love, for life. But as her mother's eyes searched hers, all the guilt, all the shame came rushing back. I thought, Mama Eniola continued, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow, that nothing was worth losing yourself for. Not even love. Belinda's tears fell silently, tracing paths down her cheeks. The truth of her mother's words stung more than any wound. What had she lost? She had given up herself for the hope of saving her mother. But in doing so, had she not given away the very thing that made her whole? Her dignity, her pride, her soul. I don't regret being here, Mama Eniola said, her voice softening, but I regret that you had to pay such a price. I regret that the world has made you feel this was the only way. Billionaire didn't know what to say, how to respond. She felt hollow, like a shell that had been emptied out, left to drift in the currents of life. She had given herself to Musa for the one thing she loved most in the world. But now that love felt distant. It felt cold. The village had celebrated her mother's return, and Billionaire had joined in, feigning happiness, feigning gratitude. But her heart was no longer in it. She watched her mother interact with the people so full of life, so full of love, and she wondered if she could ever be that woman again. The woman who once stood proudly beside her mother, who felt whole, who felt worthy. But now, everything was different. Her body, once a temple, felt violated. Her spirit, once free, felt chained. She couldn't escape the truth of what she had done, and every time she looked at her mother, she was reminded of the cost. Her mother had lived, but at what price? And was it worth it? Days turned into weeks, but the emptiness in Balin's heart did not fade. The villagers saw only the healing of Mama Eniola, the woman who had been brought back from the brink of death. They saw Billionaire's return to her duties, caring for the fields, helping with the harvest, and attending to the needs of the community. To them, she was the daughter who had made a sacrifice for her mother, a daughter who had done what was necessary, no matter the cost. But Billionaire knew better. She could no longer walk the same path. Every step she took in the village felt like a lie. The smiles she gave were hollow, the words she spoke empty. Her soul was fractured, and nothing, no matter how much she worked, no matter how many times she prayed, could fill the void that had taken root in her. One morning, as she walked through the village square, she saw Musa. He was seated on a low stone bench, as always surrounded by men of influence and wealth. The sight of him sent a chill down her spine. There he sat, as confident as ever, the man who had taken her body and soul, the man who had made her bargain away her future, the man who had kept his word. But there was no gratitude in her heart for him. Only anger. Atrith. Billionaire paused, staring at him from across the square. His eyes caught hers, and he gave a knowing smile, a look that sent her heart into a furious pounding. He still thinks he owns me, she thought bitterly. It was as if nothing had changed for him. For him, the deal had been nothing more than a transaction. He had gotten what he wanted, and now he had moved on. But Billionaire couldn't move on. Her mother's recovery was nothing short of a miracle. But what had it cost? Billionaire's eyes narrowed as she walked away from the square, leaving Musa and his companions behind. As she reached the edge of the village, she turned toward the path that led to the sacred Grova place. The villagers had always considered holy. It was said that the spirits of their ancestors dwelled there, and many came to pray for guidance. It was also a place where one could come to seek answers in times of great crisis. Billionaire had not visited it since the day her mother fell ill, but now the weight of her guilt and confusion led her there, as if by instinct. When she arrived at the grove, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sound of rustling leaves. The ancient trees seemed to stretch into the heavens, their twisted roots digging deep into the soil as if they were connected to the very heart of the earth. Billionaire felt a sense of peace, but it was also a place that reminded her of all she had lost. She knelt down at the base of an old, gnarled tree, her hands trembling as she dug her fingers into the soil. "Great spirits of the ancestors," she whispered, her voice breaking, I have come to ask for forgiveness. For myself, for what I have done." She bowed her head, waiting for the silence to consume her, but nothing came. No answer, no sign. The spirits were silent. She wept, the tears falling freely as she thought of the life she had traded for her mother's. What had she lost? What had she become? Her body felt foreign to her, and her soul felt as though it had been torn from her and left to wither. She had given everything, but the price had not been just her body. It had been her very spirit. And now she was empty. As she sat there in the silence, something shifted in the air. The stillness seemed to breathe around her. Balindel's heart pounded as she looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows. The figure was tall, cloaked in the mist of the grove. She recognized the figure immediately. "Mama," Balindel's voice was a whisper. Her mother stood before her, not as the frail woman she had once been, but as a figure of strength and power. Her eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and she radiated an energy Billionaire had never seen before. "Mother!" Billionaire cried out, running to her, her hands reaching out, but Mama Eniola stopped her with a firm, silent gesture. "Do not approach me," her mother said, her voice echoing through the grove, as if it came from the very earth itself. "I am no longer the woman you knew." Billionaire stopped, her heart pounding with confusion. "What do you mean, Mama?" Mama Eniola's eyes darkened, and she raised a hand to the sky. "You saved my life, but what you did to do so has not come without its consequences. Do you truly think that the spirits would leave such a debt unaccounted for?" Balin's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I did it for you, Mama. You have lost yourself, Billionaire," her mother interrupted, her voice firm. "The price of what you did is not just in the flesh, but in the soul. The spirit world does not forget such bargains. And you, my daughter, have made a deal with darkness." Balin's legs shook, and she fell to her knees. "No," she whispered. "No, I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't know." "You knew," her mother said, her voice softer now, but still filled with sorrow. "You knew the cost, but you chose it anyway. You chose love. But love, my child, is not something that can be bought." Billionaire wept, her tears falling like rain as her mother's form began to fade, the mist of the grove swallowing her whole. "Remember, Bolanle," Mama Eniola's voice echoed in the silence. "True sacrifice comes from the heart, not from the bargain you made. You must find your way back. You must find your spirit again." And weep that her mother was gone, leaving Billionaire alone in the grove, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had lost. The days after the visit to the grove were the darkest Billionaire had ever known. She could not escape the image of her mother's face as she had stood before her in the mist, strong, unyielding, and distant. The weight of her words lingered, gnawing at her soul, filling her with an ache that would not leave. She had made the choice. She had made the sacrifice. But now she understood. Love was not meant to be bargained for. Love could not be traded, and what she had given away could never be returned. Billionaire wandered through the village in a haze, the faces of those around her blurring together. She had done everything for her mother, everything to save her, but the price had been too high. She had lost herself in the process, and the life she had once known felt like a distant memory. No longer did she walk with the pride of a daughter who had done the right thing. Instead, she walked with the weight of her choices heavy on her shoulders, carrying a burden no one else could see. Every time she passed the square, she saw Musa. He was always there, seated among the wealthiest men, laughing and making deals. He had taken what he wanted, and now he continued with his life as though nothing had changed. To him, Billionaire was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a woman who had been bought, used, and discarded. The thought made her sick. One morning, as Billionaire wandered to the village outskirts, she found herself standing at the edge of the great river. The water was flowing fast, the current strong and unrelenting, just as her life had become. The memories of the night with Musa came crashing back, his cold hands, his cruel smile, the feeling of being nothing but an object to be possessed. The emptiness. But in that moment, something shifted inside of her. She stood there, staring at the water, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief. She had made a mistake. She had chosen the wrong path, but as the river flowed before her, she realized something. The river didn't stop flowing because it made a mistake. The river didn't go backward, it moved forward, carving its own path, regardless of the obstacles in its way. And so, Billionaire made a choice. She would not remain a prisoner of her past. She would not be defined by the bargains she had made. There was still time. There was still hope, but she had to change, had to find her way back to the woman she once was. She took a deep breath, the air heavy with the smell of the river, the earth beneath her feet firm and real. She could feel the presence of the spirits around her, their watchful eyes guiding her, urging her to move forward. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the ancestors, asking for strength, for guidance, for forgiveness. "I will find my way back," she vowed, her voice steady. "I will be whole." Again, with that, she turned away from the river and made her way back to the village. Her first step was uncertain, but each one after felt more sure. Her heart still ached, but it was no longer a wound that would consume her. She had the power to heal it herself. As Billionaire walked back into the village, something began to shift within her. She could feel the energy of the earth beneath her feet, the power of the sun warming her skin, and the whispers of the ancestors in the wind. She was not lost anymore. She was finding her way. It wasn't easy. The shame, the guilt, the weight of her actions, they didn't vanish. But as Billionaire took the time to heal, to work with her hands in the soil, and listen to the voices of the people she had once loved, she began to remember who she was. She was not just a daughter of a healer. She was a woman, a person in her own right, and no man, no bargain, could take that away from her. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons shifted, Billionaire's heart began to heal. She did not seek Musa again. She did not need his power or his wealth. She found strength in the simple things, helping the village, tending to the earth, working alongside her people. Her connection with Mama Inyola grew stronger, and though there was still an unspoken tension between them, there was also understanding. And then, one day, as Billionaire worked in the fields, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the village. It was Musa. He had come, as he always did, to see what he could take. But this time Billionaire did not feel fear. She did not feel anger. She simply felt nothing. "Musa," she said, standing tall, "I have nothing more to give you." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. But for the first time, there was no malice in his gaze. There was no hunger. He saw her as she was no longer a woman to be owned, but a woman who had found herself again. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Billionaire watched him leave, and in that moment, she felt a sense of release. The chains had been broken. Se was free. Billionaire had given so much to save her mother, but in the end, the greatest gift she had received was the strength to reclaim her life. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was hers to walk, and as she looked toward the horizon, she knew that she would continue to move forward, step by step, until she had healed completely. Seasons passed, and Billionaire continued her quiet path towards healing. The village, ever watchful, noticed the change in her. No longer did they see the young woman who had once been consumed by guilt and fear. Instead, they saw a woman who had found her own strength, a woman whose face held the wisdom of someone who had journeyed through darkness and returned. Billionaire's relationship with her mother, Mama Inyola, slowly blossomed into something deeper than it had ever been before. There were still moments of quiet tension between them, but there was also an unspoken understanding. Billionaire had made a choice, one that she would never regret, but one she would always carry with her. She had been forced to see the depths of sacrifice and love, and in doing so, had found a deeper connection to her heritage, her roots, and her identity. One afternoon, as Billionaire walked through the village, she felt the cool breeze of the river whisper against her skin. The path that had once seemed so foreign to her now felt like the one she had always been meant to walk. She had been lost in the current of her own choices, but now she could see the way forward. The waters of the river, once a reflection of her inner turmoil, were now calm, flowing peacefully toward the horizon. Billionaire paused at the riverbank, her hands resting on the stones, feeling the steady flow beneath her. The river, like life itself, moved on. There were no shortcuts, no easy answers, only the steady push of time. She had learned to let go of the shame, the regret, and the anger that had once consumed her. She had learned that the path to peace began with acceptance not of what had been lost, but of what could still be gained. As she looked out over the river, she heard the voices of the ancestors again, not as a reminder of what had been, but as a gentle call to continue. The lesson they imparted was clear. Redemption was a journey, not a destination. One had to keep walking, step by step, toward the light of him when it seemed distant. And so, Billionaire stood by the river, watching the water carry away the past, and she felt peace for the first time in a long while. Her journey wasn't over. It never would be, but in that moment, she was whole again.